Her smile lingered in the doorway, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was just a friendly gesture. But when she whispered, "My husband's out till morning," something inside me shifted. I knew then I wasn't leaving. The first time I saw her, I was watering the garden, distracted by the steady rhythm of the hose, watching droplets glitter in the afternoon sunlight. She had just stepped out onto her porch, adjusting the strap of her sundress, the soft fabric swaying with the breeze. Her eyes met mine for the briefest of moments, and I couldn't look away. She wasn't like the other neighbors. There was a quiet confidence in her that was hard to ignore, a grace that didn't scream for attention but seemed to effortlessly command it. Maybe it was the way she held herself. Never hurried, never flustered, yet always with purpose. Her posture was elegant, and even in something as simple as a summer dress, she managed to carry herself with a kind of effortless sophistication. I turned away quickly, pretending to be engrossed in the task at hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air. The space between our houses felt smaller somehow, more intimate, though we had never spoken more than a polite hello. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and brief moments. I'd see her in the morning, sitting on her porch with a book, her face framed by the soft glow of early sunlight. I couldn't help but notice the subtle lines of age around her eyes, like a map of laughter, of stories lived. She was older than me by a good few years, but there was something magnetic about her that was impossible to ignore. When we did exchange words, it was always cordial, small talk, the kind you exchange with a neighbor you don't know well enough to be friends with but still wave at when passing by. She'd ask how my day was going, how the garden was coming along. I'd offer the same questions back. It was polite, it was friendly, but I could feel the unspoken layer beneath it. She wasn't just being friendly. There was a subtle spark, a warmth that seemed to linger in the spaces between her words. And I was certain I wasn't imagining it. Her presence stayed with me long after our brief interactions ended. When I closed the door at night and settled into bed, I'd catch myself thinking about her. Not in the way that one thinks about someone who is simply attractive. No, this was different. There was an intensity in her gaze that spoke volumes, and it felt like she was waiting for something, though I had no idea what that something was. There was a soft tension that I didn't know how to name. It wasn't obvious, not like the kind of romantic attraction you read about in books or see in movies. No, this was something subtler, quieter, a presence that made my pulse quicken without me even realizing it. And though I tried to ignore it, there were times, moments, when I caught her looking at me, her eyes lingering for just a fraction longer than necessary. And every time, my heart would race, a quiet thrill shooting through me. The strange thing was, she didn't seem to shy away from the glance. If anything, there was a certain knowing in the way she looked at me, as if she understood something that I was too afraid to admit. But I didn't dare let myself imagine more. Not yet. There was a distance between us, an invisible line that, no matter how small it seemed, kept us worlds apart. She was married. She had a life I could never be a part of. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, that line wasn't as strong as it appeared. And so, I kept watering my garden, stealing glances when I thought she wouldn't notice, all the while feeling the weight of the space between us. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of quiet evening where the sky turns from soft blue to warm amber as the sun sets. I had just finished a long day at work and was standing in the yard, half-heartedly tending to the garden again. My thoughts were elsewhere, wandering, when I heard her voice. It was soft, almost tentative at first, like she wasn't sure whether she should interrupt the quiet of the evening. "Hey, I was wondering if you could help me with something." I looked up, startled, and saw her standing at the edge of her porch, just beyond the low, iron fence separating our yards. She was smiling, that same smile that had always made my heart beat a little faster. There was something different about this smile, though. It wasn't just polite, not the usual neighborly expression. It held an invitation. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over to the fence, meeting her gaze. She didn't say anything else for a beat, and I couldn't help but notice how her eyes flickered with a quiet anticipation, as if she were waiting for me to say something. I smiled awkwardly. "Of course, what do you need?" Her lips curved slightly, and she stepped a little closer, leaning just enough against the fence to feel less like a stranger and more like a confidant. "Well, I was just thinking," she began, trailing off as if considering how to phrase it. She glanced behind her, almost as if to make sure the house was empty. Then, in a voice that was low and casual, she said, "My husband's out till morning, and I was wondering if you'd like to come over for a drink. Just a quiet one." I thought we could actually have a real conversation, instead of the usual small talk. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I could barely process what she'd said. Her husband being gone, it was unexpected. But it wasn't just that. There was an undercurrent in her voice, a tone that implied she wasn't inviting me over simply for a drink. There was something deeper there, something neither of us was saying out loud. I opened my mouth, unsure whether to speak, but I found myself smiling without meaning to. "Sure," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I was more surprised by the invitation or by my own eagerness to accept it. She gave me a quick, almost nervous smile, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. "Great, I'll be waiting." And with that, she turned and disappeared into her house. I stood there for a moment, still processing the encounter. There was a strange heaviness in the air now, something palpable that made the evening feel different, charged in a way I wasn't used to. I felt a bit like I'd been caught in the undertow of something I couldn't control, swept along by her smile, her words, and the way her presence lingered in my mind. I forced myself to focus, to take a deep breath and calm the racing thoughts in my head. It wasn't a big deal, right? She was just a neighbor, after all, inviting me over for a drink. But even as I tried to tell myself that, I couldn't ignore the flutter in my chest, the pull of something unspoken that made my feet move toward her house without hesitation. When I reached her front door, I paused for a brief moment, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I knocked softly, the sound of it feeling louder than it should have been. The door opened quickly, and there she was, standing in the frame, looking even more beautiful than I remembered. Her presence filled the space between us, a quiet warmth that made my heart skip. "Come in," she said, and I stepped inside, unsure of where this moment would take us. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going anywhere, not tonight. The moment I stepped inside her house, I could feel the shift. It wasn't just the warmth of the space, the soft, golden light that bathed the living room. It was the sense of intimacy that seemed to settle in the air between us. This wasn't just a friendly gesture. I could feel it. We were crossing into a different territory, one that was unfamiliar, and yet, in some ways, strangely familiar. She led me through the hallway, her movements graceful, almost deliberate. The house was cozy, tastefully decorated, but not in an overly ornate way. It was the kind of home that made you feel at ease, like a place you could spend hours in without needing to look at the clock. There were books scattered on the coffee table, a few potted plants by the windows, and photographs on the walls. Snapshots of moments frozen in time, of family holidays and birthdays. It was clear that her life here, though quiet, had been full of moments of significance. I followed her into the living room, where a glass of red wine sat on the coffee table, already poured. She had a way of making everything feel effortless, as if this was something we had done many times before, though we both knew it wasn't. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, motioning toward the couch. "I hope you like wine." I nodded, more to reassure myself than to answer her. She had already sensed my hesitation. I was standing there, awkwardly, unsure of what to do with myself. The silence between us felt different now, more profound, like a pause in a conversation that hadn't yet begun. I sat down, the soft cushions enveloping me, and she took the seat opposite me. The space between us felt charged, yet she didn't seem uncomfortable. Her eyes, warm and inviting, met mine as she sat back with a sigh, letting the evening settle around us. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, sipping our wine, the sound of the clock ticking softly in the background. I couldn't help but notice the way the light played across her face, highlighting the lines of wisdom and experience that made her so striking. There was something so real about her, something that pulled me in without effort. "Tell me about yourself," she said after a while, her voice breaking the silence. It wasn't a question born out of politeness, I could tell she genuinely wanted to know. She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped together, her eyes intently fixed on me. I hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the vulnerability of the question. There was a quiet weight to it, as if she were asking for more than just a few facts. I guess there's not much to tell, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I'm just trying to figure things out, you know? Life's kind of a blur sometimes. She nodded, her expression softening as she listened. I get it, she replied, her voice gentle but knowing. Life is a way of doing that. We get caught up in it, and before we know it, it feels like we're just waiting for something to happen. I couldn't help but wonder if she was speaking from her own experience, her own moments of waiting, of uncertainty. There was something in her words that made me want to open up, to share more than I had ever shared with anyone else. But I hesitated. I didn't know why. Exactly. Maybe it was the presence of the unspoken boundaries that still hung between us, the understanding that no matter how much I wanted to be closer to her, she was still someone else's. But as she sat there, so effortlessly present, so easy to talk to, I found it hard to resist the pull. We talked for hours, or at least it felt like it. We spoke about everything, about our lives, our regrets, our moments of joy and sadness. It was the kind of conversation that felt like it was happening not just in the present, but also in the past and future, as if we were connecting on a deeper level that neither of us could explain. And as the evening wore on, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected, a quiet comfort, a sense of belonging. This was no longer just a casual conversation between neighbors. It was something more, something I couldn't yet put into words. The night was drawing to a close when she got up to fetch another bottle of wine, her soft footsteps barely making a sound on the floor. As she moved around the room, I couldn't help but notice the way the light caught her hair, the way she moved with an effortless elegance. It was then that I realized, for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt no rush to leave. It wasn't until the wine had long been finished and the conversation had softened into a comfortable silence that I noticed how close we had become. The subtle space between us had nearly disappeared without either of us saying a word about it. She sat just a few feet away, but the air felt so thick, so full of unspoken words, that it seemed impossible for the distance to exist at all. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of distant traffic outside. She shifted slightly, tucking her legs beneath her, her eyes never leaving mine. There was a new intensity in her gaze now, a quiet invitation that didn't need to be spoken. The warmth from the wine had settled in my chest, making me feel both grounded and unmoored at the same time. "Would you like more?" she asked, her voice low, almost too soft. She was offering me more wine, but I could hear the unsaid question there, wrapped in the offer. She was asking if I wanted to stay, to linger in the shared space we had carved out in the dim light of her living room. I hesitated, the rational part of my mind warning me to pull back, to recognize the boundary that was still there between us. But the part of me that had been drawn to her from the first moment we met couldn't resist. "No, I think I'm good," I replied, my voice a little rougher than I intended. She smiled softly, and there was something in that smile, a flicker of something that passed between us. She didn't look away, didn't shy from the silence. Instead, she leaned back slightly, resting her elbow on the armrest of the couch, her fingers brushing the edge of the cushion. She was so close now that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, the soft scent of her perfume mingling with the lingering aroma of the wine. It wasn't intentional at first, just a casual movement, but her hand, resting near mine on the armrest, was close enough that I couldn't ignore it. The space between our hands felt like an invisible line, one that I couldn't bring myself to cross. But then, without thinking, I reached out. My fingers brushed hers, a feather-light touch that felt like an electric current passing between us. The sensation was so subtle, yet it reverberated through me, settling in my chest like a spark. Her breath caught, just barely audible, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. The touch was innocent enough, but it held more weight than either of us had anticipated. Her fingers shifted slightly, and before I could pull my hand away, she had gently placed hers over mine, her palm warm and soft against my skin. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what had just happened. Her hand, so confidently placed over mine, held me in place. She didn't pull away. She didn't even seem to hesitate. Her fingers curled slightly, a soft pressure that was both reassuring and strangely exhilarating. Her gaze met mine then, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The distance between us, the boundary we had both been too careful to cross, it was gone. The vulnerability in her eyes, the quiet question in them, was all I needed to know. This wasn't a fleeting touch, a casual brush. She had made the choice to touch me, to let this moment happen. My pulse quickened, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my hand slightly, the back of her fingers brushing against mine in the softest of movements. I could feel the heat of her skin, the delicate tremor in her touch that mirrored the flutter in my chest. "You don't have to go," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath, the words so quiet that I almost wondered if I'd imagined them. But I heard them, clear and soft, and my answer was simple: "I'm not leaving." And as I said it, I knew it was true. There was no going back now. The minutes that followed felt like they were stretched out, fragile threads of time woven with the tension neither of us could escape. Her hand was still resting on mine, and though the touch was gentle, almost tentative, it held a weight that neither of us had prepared for. Her fingers were warm against my skin, but there was a subtle tremor in her touch, as if she, too, was feeling the pull of something she didn't fully understand. I could feel the quiet storm of emotions swirling between us: desire, hesitation, guilt, and something far deeper that neither of us had dared to address yet. This was more than just a casual invitation. She had invited me in, not just into her home, but into a space that neither of us knew how to navigate. The rules had changed, and with that shift, so had everything we thought we understood. She pulled her hand away first, a small but significant movement, as if the contact had become too much to bear. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I crossed a line, if the act of simply being close to her had caused her to doubt the choices we had made. But she didn't retreat. Instead, she simply turned slightly, her eyes dropping to the wine glass in her hand, as if seeking solace in the ordinary act of holding it. The glass glinted in the low light, a faint reflection of her face in the surface of the wine. "I shouldn't have said that," she murmured, her voice soft and almost apologetic. There was a hesitation in her words, a fragility that had not been there before. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable." I leaned forward, not wanting the distance to grow between us, even if it was only in the space of a few inches. "You didn't," I replied quickly, my voice more urgent than I intended. "It's just, I don't want to make things harder for you." Her eyes met mine, and there it was again, that flicker of vulnerability that seemed to always be present beneath the surface. "You're not," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "But you don't understand. It's not simple. I'm married. I've been married for years, and I made a promise." The words hit me like a quiet slap. I knew she was right. There was a whole life she had built, a history, a commitment that I could never fully be a part of. The reality of it stung, and for a moment, I felt foolish. How could I have let myself get caught up in something so complicated, so fraught with consequences? Her gaze softened as she continued, her tone laced with regret. "I don't know why I invited you here. It's like something in me just needed to be seen, to be heard. But that doesn't mean I should act on it." I could feel the weight of her words settling over me, and for the first time that night, I felt the full weight of the situation. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation or a fleeting moment of connection. It was real, and the choices we made here, tonight, would have repercussions. But even as she spoke, I couldn't help but feel the pull between us, undeniable and intense. Her presence, her warmth, the way she made me feel seen in ways no one else had ever done. I couldn't just walk away from that. "I didn't want to. I don't want to make things difficult for you," I said again, my voice softer now, filled with the understanding of what she was saying. But I also knew something else, something I couldn't deny. But I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken desires and unacknowledged truths. The air between us seemed charged, full of things neither of us dared to say aloud. We both knew that the next move would change everything. Either we let the moment slip away, or we risked stepping into something neither of us was sure we could handle. She looked at me then, her gaze steady but conflicted. "This isn't something I can easily undo," she whispered, her voice low, full of uncertainty. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to. The truth was, neither of us was ready to walk away from what had already begun. The next few days were filled with an unbearable quiet, the kind of silence that's loud enough to consume everything, even the most mundane of tasks. Every time I passed her house, I found myself stealing glances, looking for any sign that she might be watching from behind her curtains or stepping out onto the porch. But the space between us had grown larger, as if the simple act of getting too close had pushed us both into retreat. We avoided each other, more out of uncertainty than anything else. Small talk seemed impossible now, as if the weight of our last conversation hung like an invisible barrier between us. I could feel the echo of her words in my mind. "This isn't something I can easily undo." Those words had a haunting finality to them, a truth we couldn't ignore. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved, something unspoken that lingered, waiting for a moment to surface. I knew she was just as caught in it as I was. The longing, the desire, the quiet ache that neither of us was brave enough to acknowledge. Then, one evening, after a week of nothing but distance, I saw her again. It wasn't anything grand, no dramatic encounter or chance meeting. It was simple, the kind of moment that can change everything without anyone realizing it. I was out in my yard, mindlessly pulling weeds, when I heard her voice. Soft, almost hesitant. "Hey." I froze. My heart jumped in my chest, and I looked up, only to see her standing in the doorway of her house, just as she had the first time we spoke. But this time, there was something different in her posture, something less guarded. She wasn't standing at arm's length, as she usually did. Instead, she was leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, and her eyes met mine with a quiet intensity. There was no smile, no playful teasing, just something real, something raw. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to find the words that had been eluding me all week. "Hey," I replied, my voice a little rougher than I expected. I stepped closer to the fence, the space between us still a reminder of what had passed between us, but the invisible wall seemed thinner now. "I was thinking," she started, her voice trailing off for a moment, as if unsure whether to say what was on her mind. "Maybe we could talk? Properly this time, without pretending things are fine or that they aren't." Her words hung in the air, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the vulnerability that she wasn't trying to hide anymore. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just watched her, feeling the sudden shift in the energy between us. The awkwardness, the tension, it was all still there, but it felt different now, like we both understood that something had shifted and we had to decide what to do about it. "I've been thinking too," I said finally, my voice steady but uncertain. "And I don't want to keep pretending. I can't." She nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Me neither. I don't want to push you away. I don't know what this is, what we are, but I don't want to just forget it either." I stepped closer to the fence, closing the gap just a little. I wanted to reach out, to do something, to bridge the distance between us in a way that words couldn't. But I held back. This moment, whatever it was, felt too delicate to rush. "Then don't," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't push me away." For a long while we just stood there, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. The world around us seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us standing at the edge of something we couldn't fully grasp, but both knew we couldn't walk away from. It was then that I realized she wasn't asking me to fix anything. She wasn't asking for answers. All she wanted was to be seen, to be heard, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in so long. And I wasn't going to run away from that. Not now. Not when it felt like we were finally standing in the same place, ready to face whatever came next. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly, my gaze never leaving hers. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, one that spoke more than words ever could. The next few hours passed in a blur of soft, unhurried moments. The tension that had been hanging between us for so long had finally broken, not with a grand gesture, but with the quiet understanding that we had both been seeking. It was as though the night had allowed us to step into a space where there were no expectations, no rules. Just two people simply existing in the same moment, trying to make sense of everything they couldn't explain. She invited me inside, her hand resting gently on the doorframe as she held it open for me. This time, there was no hesitation in her eyes, no cuernis, just a quiet invitation, an unspoken agreement that we were both ready to step past the silence and into something real. I followed her into the warmth of her living room, the soft glow of the lamps casting a peaceful light over the familiar surroundings. It was exactly the same as the first time I'd stepped inside, and yet everything felt different now. More intimate, more personal. We didn't talk much as we sat down on the couch. Instead, there was a comfortable silence that filled the space between us, one that wasn't heavy or uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you weren't alone, that the other person was just as content in the stillness as you were. She sat beside me, close but not too close, her legs tucked beneath her as she leaned back into the cushions, her eyes flickering over to mine every now and then with a soft, knowing smile. The room was quiet, save for the occasional soft sigh or the gentle clink of glass as we both sipped our wine. There was no rush, no urgency. We didn't need to fill the space with words because the connection between us was already understood. I could feel her presence beside me, and for the first time in days, I felt truly at ease. The weight of the conflict, the doubt, had dissolved, leaving behind only the warmth of the moment. Her hand brushed mine again, a simple touch, but it held more meaning now than it ever had before. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she let her fingers rest on top of mine, the soft pressure of her touch grounding me in that fleeting moment. It wasn't a touch filled with desire or urgency. It was a touch of reassurance, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken bond that had formed between us. I turned my hand slightly, allowing our fingers to interlace, and in that small, simple gesture, everything seemed to fall into place. There was no more need for words. We didn't need to explain ourselves, or our actions, or the feelings that had led us here. We had already said everything that needed to be said without speaking a single word. Her head leaned gently against my shoulder, and I could feel the soft weight of her as she settled into the comfort of being close to me. It was a small, intimate gesture, but it was enough. It was everything. In that moment, I understood that this was where we were supposed to be, together, without the need for explanations or apologies, simply existing in the quiet warmth of each other's presence. As the night wore on, we didn't say much. We didn't have to. The time seemed to stretch, slow down, as if the universe itself had decided to give us this one night, this one precious moment, to just be. And as I looked down at her, her eyes closed, her breath even and steady, I realized that what we had was something rare. Something unspoken, but real. She stirred slightly, her lips curving into a small smile as she looked up at me. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible. I smiled back, my heart full. "For what?" "For not giving up on us," she said, her voice steady now, her gaze soft and sure. "For being here." And just like that, I knew we didn't need anything more. No grand declarations, no promises. Just the quiet, simple understanding that we were exactly where we needed to be, together. Forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Every relationship has its quiet moments of growth, and we're here to share them with you. Comment below if you've ever felt the weight of a quiet connection that changed everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're ready for more, make sure to hit that bell icon so you never miss a new chapter.